Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for another session of Lakehead International Live. We really appreciate having you here with us today. And this is actually the final session of our most recent Lakehead Live series and the final lecture showcase, where we are giving all of you the opportunity to connect with one of our faculty members here at Lakehead and kind of go through a mock lecture, getting a taste of what it's like to be a student here at Lakehead University. So my name is Laura Puttis. I'm the International Recruitment Officer supporting students from Africa, the Middle East, and the Caribbean, and I'm based at Lakehead's beautiful Thunder Bay campus. And I'm joined today by Dr. Kathy Sanderson. Kathy's just turning her camera on, it looks like. And Kathy, can I get you to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm glad to. First of all, thank you, Laura, for inviting me to give this mock lecture. My name is Dr. Kathy Sanderson. I'm an associate professor of human resources and organizational behavior in the Faculty of Business Administration. I'm also the chair of year 1 and 2, which means that for any undergraduate students, I am their advisor for the first 2 years that they are with our program. So I am excited to have the opportunity to engage with some potential students.
That's great. Thanks so much, Kathy. And we're really excited for your lecture topic today, because it seems like it can be something that would be relevant and important to students from any different background or academic discipline. So the topic today is emotional intelligence in the workplace.
Okay, so before I get started, I would like to apologize for my horribly scratchy voice. I am really hoping that I'm not going to be coughing at you. I have been sick for about a week, so this is not how I usually sound, but I hope it'll still be okay for our lecture today. So I picked the topic emotional intelligence in the workplace. As Laura mentioned, this is a topic that is very relevant in workplaces, but also really relevant in all aspects of our lives where we are interacting with other people. So this topic would fall under one of my areas of expertise, which is organizational behavior. And organizational behavior is the study of behavior in and around organizations. So pretty self-explanatory title. And it would include topics such as leadership, personality, motivation, teamwork, conflict resolution, workplace culture, stress at work. So a lot of different topics that overlap between the person or the employee, the individual, and the workplace. Now, my approach to emotional intelligence and our short lecture today will put us in the position of the manager when we go to do our practice or we go to try out part of the emotional intelligence model. And the emotional intelligence model that I use is based on the Daniel Goleman model. There's a number of different models for emotional intelligence. They're all somewhat similar. Um, but it is a bit of a complex model. When we look at the components of the model, it looks really straightforward, but the skills and the topics that are contained within those areas are complex. And the reason that they're complex is because of the nature of human behavior. And so there's some of the things that we know about human behavior. One of them is that what you think is common sense is not common sense. And we all approach and think about situations differently. And that's why a skill such as emotional intelligence is so important, is because it gives us the ability to take a look at the situation, see what might be happening, take a guess at how people might be feeling, and then alter our response um, based on those factors. And so today I want to talk a little bit about the role of emotional intelligence at work, why it's important to workplaces. And like I mentioned, I always look at things from the perspective of the manager. And that is because we know that the majority of our students who do an undergrad with us in business, the Honors Bachelor of Commerce degree, within 5 years, most of them are in supervisory positions, whether that is fully working as a manager or perhaps leading a team. And so we spend a lot of our time when we're studying human resources and organizational behavior, focusing on that managerial role. Because we know that these are skills that our students are going to need after they graduate. And depending on the time, we'll also try a little bit of a practice. So how could we apply some of the things that we learn about emotional intelligence when we're trying to have a difficult conversation with a staff member? So I'm going to go through a full definition of emotional intelligence. But to start with, I will say that emotional intelligence is um, the ability to manage and control our own emotions and to understand and work with the emotions of others. So it's a little bit more than emotional regulation, right? It isn't just about like, I'm going to hold all my emotions in and act like a robot. It's being able to appropriately use emotions in order to develop relationships. And so it becomes very apparent as to why we need that within workplaces, but also how we can use it within our personal lives. So I am hoping that some of you have access to the chat, and perhaps you could start by answering or putting in some ideas for one of these two questions. So one of the things that we know is that emotional intelligence, and you'll see from the rest of my slides, I call it EI. Why is EI such a popular workplace topic? So I would like to know, have you heard of EI? Have you heard of that phrase of emotional intelligence? And or why do you think that workplaces would care so much about their employees' ability to show emotional intelligence? So pop anything into the chat that comes to mind. Oh, so someone has already given the answer of client relations. That is an excellent example. So you have to maintain relationships with clients and not only maintain, but also start new relationships, right? Get a client to choose you or to choose your firm or your business. And yes, that's a fantastic example of where we'd be using emotional intelligence. And then what about interpersonal conflicts and relationships? I think that if you were to ask managers, they would say that handling interpersonal conflict is probably one of the most difficult tasks that they have at work. And handling conflicts is such a difficult topic. Now, I won't go too far into that area because that is another one of the things that I love to talk about, and I'm very easy to take off track. Um, but what we know is that we don't have a huge number of theories related to conflict resolution that are really very good. And as a result, what we do know is that using emotional intelligence to resolve conflicts is at least as effective, if not better, than some of our traditional conflict resolution styles. So that's a fantastic point that you made there. So someone has put in the idea about EI being more important. I'm going to assume that means more important than intelligence. Now, that is a huge topic. But what we know is that um, emotional intelligence, it might not get you the job, but it will probably get you the promotion. So when people are when organizations are looking to hire at the entry level, they are looking for someone who has a certain set of skills, right? Maybe they want you to know accounting or finance or operations or something related to information technology. And so perhaps, through your degree and your work experience, or your experiential learning that you've received through um, your program at Lakehead University, you get the job. Now, what is going to get you promoted will be emotional intelligence, how you get along with people, how you develop relationships, whether or not your employees and your coworkers trust you. So it's very interesting to me that already you have heard of some of these things about emotional intelligence. And you're right, some people might say, I can teach someone the skills, right? If you have a basic understanding of, say, human resources, I can teach you the technical parts. I can teach you how to use our system, how we would use a process, what we would do when things go wrong. But it is much more difficult for me to teach you something related to emotional intelligence. Not that you can't learn it, because it is a skill. It is not an actual intelligence that you are born with. Now, are some people naturally more emotional intelligent than others? Yeah, probably. But that's probably also because of their experience and their background and, factors related to how things work in their house. I think one of the most exciting things about emotional intelligence is that you can learn it. And that's something that you can actually do on your own. Um, great responses. Thank you. All right, so let's take a look at what is emotional intelligence. And I picked this little picture because I like the way it shows all of the different gears working together, and that emotional intelligence isn't about just having one particular skill or aspect. It's about having all of them and getting them all working together at the same time. All right, so what is our definition for emotional intelligence? So it is the ability to recognize and manage your own emotions and understand how others are feeling so that you can work well with them. It is not trying to manage someone else's emotion, right? It's trying to sort of work with it or think about strategies that might be more effective. Um, I don't want to suggest that we can change someone else's emotions, but we certainly, by understanding how other people are feeling, we can have a much better approach when we are trying to decide how are we going to deliver our message, or how are we going to try to, for example, build trust with this person. Pardon me. So let's do a little bit more of where are within your employment. And if you haven't worked in the past, maybe within your schoolwork, give some examples of situations where you have either used or wish that you used emotional intelligence. So, any kind of an example of an emotional situation that could happen at work. You can just put that up into the chat. Any kind of situation where you've seen emotions at work. So we have one already. Probably the most common situation that we try to work on using emotional intelligence is the angry customer, right? And any of us who have worked in customer service, right? When I was going to university, I waitressed all through my undergrad degree, and angry customers, dissatisfied customers, um, people who were generally unhappy about things that were happening, that's such a great example of emotional intelligence. What else do we have here? Oh, when someone gets angry with us, like our supervisor, or perhaps our supervisor is giving us some criticism, and we don't think that that criticism is valid, or when we hear that criticism, it hits something within us that um, kind of triggers or encourages, I'll say, an emotion. So perhaps um, our supervisor says something and we're feeling hurt, or we're feeling confused, or we're feeling upset, or perhaps we're even feeling a little bit insecure. Um, that's another fantastic example of how emotions can come up at work, because we're human beings always first. Oh, and then someone has an example of a personal situation that might come into the workplace. So, pardon me, an employee who has suffered a loss. So maybe someone has had a death in their family, and as a result, the employee is distraught, or they are unable to focus, or they're generally feeling down, or they appear to be unmotivated, but it is because they are overwhelmed with emotions. Oh, we also have the example of when we have to do something that might cause emotions for us. So, for example, what happens when you have to terminate someone? That person that you terminate obviously is going to be having some probably strong emotions, but so are we, right? When we have to tell someone that they no longer have their job, that can be an extremely emotional situation. Before I came to work at the university, I worked for over 20 years managing um, different types of allied health organizations. And I know from firing people that it's an emotional experience all the way around. These are really fantastic um, examples. So, what happens when we are working with someone who is anxious? And perhaps they are someone who is anxious most of the time, or someone who is, I see the word there, moody, or someone who has, um, you're never quite sure what it's going to be like when they walk into work in the morning. Are they going to be happy? Are they going to be miserable? These are all such fantastic examples. Sorry, a lawnmower just went by outside of my office. I hope you can still hear me. These are all fantastic examples of when we might use emotional intelligence at work. And I'll add a few more on. So when there's any kind of conflict between coworkers, or maybe we're trying to avoid a conflict, maybe we're new to the workplace and we're trying to make friends. Maybe we have someone who we work with who is rude or demanding. Maybe we're also trying to adapt to a lot of changes that are happening within the workplace. And sometimes we work with people who are just plain hurtful, right? So there are so many situations at work where we might be able to use, or we can help the situation by using emotional intelligence. So I think from that list, you can already see why emotional intelligence matters at work. Because we know that when employees have higher levels of emotional intelligence, that they are able to stay calm under pressure, they can handle conflicts in a respectful way, and they think about how their words will affect other people. And so they aren't just taking in the technical or the specific information, they are also thinking about the human component. And in a couple of slides, I'll go through all of the benefits that workplaces experience when they have a staff with high levels of emotional intelligence. But first, I want to show you the model. Now, as I mentioned, there's a number of different models for emotional intelligence, um, but they all follow this general pattern. Some of them have four components, some of them have five components. What you'll sometimes see is the third component broken into two separate, but pardon me, factors. But this is the general structure. So the first part of emotional intelligence is recognizing your own emotions. And the second part of that, which can be even more difficult, is understanding how your own emotions influence your actions. Now, what we tend to think is, well, yes, I was a little bit grumpy that day, but I didn't let it show, right? That might be what we think, right? Emotional intelligence, if we're highly emotional intelligent, we would recognize that even if I'm trying to control it, there will be things about me that are different. And because of that, I will not be interacting with people in the same way until I get that emotion under control. So that's block one, self-awareness. This is my favorite block. And it is, I think, the very most important part of this whole model. If you don't have time or the energy or the interest to work on very much of your emotional intelligence skill building, but you want to do something, this is the block to focus on. Raising your self-awareness will naturally have other positive effects on your behavior. It is one of the most amazing things about self-awareness. And I mean true self-awareness, where you have sat down and you have thought, oh, that conversation I had, yesterday with my coworker, it didn't go so great. Usually that person and I get along so well. I wonder what happened. And then you stop and you think, how was I feeling that day? How did I feel when I got up that morning? How was I feeling when I approached them? How was I feeling about the conversation that I had to have about them? And how do I think that those emotions may have affected the way that I interacted with them? If you do only that and start to raise your awareness of how your emotions influence your own action, you will see an increase in your emotional intelligence. Self-awareness is one of the most powerful tools that we have for all kinds of personal development. The second part is, of course, self-regulation. We have to figure out how to get those emotions in check. We can't just naturally, respond to the emotion. And that can be really difficult when emotions come up unexpectedly. I always use one of my own horrible examples here. As I mentioned to you, I have a lot of managerial experience, and I was managing someone and she violated a safety policy, a very, very important safety policy. And when I came into work that morning, she said to me, oh, this was happening last night, and this is what I did. And the thing that she did was the violation of the safety policy. And before I got a hold of my emotions, out of my mouth came, how could you be so stupid? That was what I said to her. Obviously, an unbelievably unkind thing to say, not helpful. That was me responding to my emotion. I had not taken the time to get that emotion in check to say, okay, I'm going to need a minute, come and see me in 15 minutes for me to have the awareness that I needed to control that emotion. And of course, as much as you apologize, once those words fly out of your mouth, you can't, you don't get to like reel them back. You can't do a little rewind situation. And so it's very important that we have methods that we can use that work for ourselves to regulate our own emotions. The third box is empathy. Now, this is a combination of understanding other people's emotions, but also being empathetic or showing care and consideration for those emotions. So when you know that someone is going through a difficult time, that you would be letting them know. that you understand that this is a difficult time. You may not understand exactly all of their emotions, but you know that this is something that's going to be really difficult. And not only does it communicate support to employees, but it also communicates trust and caring, which are two really important um, skills that we want to be able to communicate to our employees is that I'm here to help you. I will approach this with kindness. I will give you a chance. I'm not here to judge you and to criticize you, but to help you to improve. And speaking with empathy is one of the fastest ways and clearest ways that you can give people those messages. And the last one is about social skills. And this is, okay, now that I know my own emotions and I've got my own emotions in control, and I can take a guess at what's happening with your emotions, and I can speak to you with empathy, now what do I do? How do I use this information to build up strong relationships, functional workplace relationships, if we can, healthy workplace relationships? And then, of course, we also want to have many different ways for communication. So we want to be able to communicate when it's a crisis situation, when it's very high stress, when there's a big deadline, when it's an emotional issue, when there's a conflict. And so this social skills box gives us sort of more of the concrete tools once we've got all of the emotional components sort of in check. So, why do organizations love emotional intelligence? What are some of the benefits? The benefits of emotional intelligence are almost never ending. So when we have employees who have high levels of emotional intelligence, we know that they're better communicators, right? Because they're not getting tripped up all the time by emotions. They're able to um, handle their emotion and deal with lots of different situations by using effective communication that's going to not only clearly deliver a message, but indicate to others that we're listening and show our support for those employees. When we have a staff with high levels of emotional intelligence, we also see much higher levels of employee engagement. And by employee engagement, I mean people who are invested in their jobs, people who enjoy their work, people who want to use their innovation, to use their creativity to assist the business, right? To assist the organization. We also see higher levels of trust within organizations where employees have higher levels of emotional intelligence. And we know that if people trust each other at work, they are far more likely to cooperate. They are less likely to have a conflict. They are more likely to give each other the benefit of the doubt. It creates a more enjoyable and peaceful working environment. It also ends up improving problem solving and decision making, right? And that is because the emotions aren't getting in the way, right? We've got our emotions in check, and now we can look at this problem that we've got um, without worrying, like, am I hurting that person's feelings? Is so and so going to fly off the handle? Right? We know that once those emotions are well managed, that we can really get into like what's gone wrong here. We also see that people who have higher levels of emotional intelligence are more flexible. They tend to be more confident in themselves, not only at work, but outside of work. Um, it also means, of course, that our customers are happier and our employees are less likely to call in sick and they're less likely to leave. And those are pretty big goals for organizations because we do not want to have high levels of turnover. If we've got fantastic employees, we want to keep them. Okay, I'm calling this quiz time, but it's barely a quiz. I have two slides with questions on them, and let's see what you think. Now, I will say that anytime when we're talking about emotional intelligence, everything is always, it depends, right? If you're a person who likes really concrete topics, organizational behavior and emotional intelligence is going to be a struggle. Um, because it always depends on the relationship, what's happening, what time of day is it? How long have we known each other? All those contextual factors. But let's take a look at two emotional intelligence situations and see what you think. Okay, so here is the first question. You receive unexpected critical feedback from your manager. What is the most emotionally intelligent first response? So here's our options. A, ask your manager to explain more, but only after you've had time to calm down. B, defend your actions and explain your side clearly. C, take a moment to reflect, ask clarifying questions respectfully, and focus on what you can learn. Or D, thank them politely, but don't show how upset you feel. You don't want to show that you're weak. Now, put in the chat, what answer do you think is the most emotionally intelligent? Okay, I'm seeing lots of C's. I would say that C is a good answer, but perhaps not the most emotionally intelligent. So oops, I'm going to take you back to our model. And the first step of our model is always about self-awareness. So I would suggest that once you've had a chance to calm down, that would be probably one of the most important first steps. When we receive criticism, our first response is to defend, right? That's a natural sort of human response to defend. Um, and it can be really difficult to say, oh, thank you. I'm going to take some time to think about that, and perhaps we can meet tomorrow to discuss it. Um, but I would say that taking some time to calm down is probably the most important first step. I will say that answer C is not incorrect, right? Take a moment to reflect, ask clarifying questions respectfully, and focus on what you can learn. Absolutely. If you already knew that your emotions were in check, I think that that would be a wonderful step as well. Okay, the second EI question. Which action shows strong emotional self-awareness? You recognize that during a group task at work that you are starting to feel very annoyed. A, step away briefly so you don't say something unhelpful. B, pretend everything is fine so that you remain professional. C, tell your close coworker you're upset so they know how you're feeling. Or D, speak up in the group so that others understand how important the issue is to you. So yes, this is always another case of it depends, isn't it? So I would say, and this will go back to showing strong emotional self-awareness, is that if you know that you are starting to feel annoyed, you probably need to get that emotion under control, right? So I would say that A, stepping away briefly, right? So that you don't say something that's not helpful and calm down. What most people do, I think, will be either B or D, right? Pretend that everything is fine, just sit there. But as I mentioned earlier, everybody would know that things aren't entirely fine. And the danger of speaking up while you're still annoyed is that you will not fully have that emotion under control. Now, I know that when, you're in a meeting and people are talking about things that are important to you and you find yourself feeling annoyed, it is so hard to stay silent, right? Because you want to jump in there. You want to get your point across. You want people to know what it is that you are thinking. Oops, sorry. But that also is one of the points where it's sort of most difficult to actually stay calm, right? And if we're thinking about, making sure that we aren't responding to that emotion, right? It is very difficult to not respond to that emotion, to say, wait a minute, this is what I think, this is what I think. And when then we're coming from a point of being annoyed, where we haven't fully got that emotion under control. So the next part I was going to get into is how we start to apply the theory. By the way, these were super hard questions, right? I intentionally made them difficult. I wanted to push you to be thinking about things like the situation and how you might be feeling. And I so appreciate your participation and your responses. And although I can't see you, I am very glad that so many of you have come to this very miniature lecture on emotional intelligence. And now I'm going to stop here because I've gone a little bit longer than I expected and see, are there any questions that I could answer?
Not seeing any questions in the Q&A yet, but maybe we'll just give participants a moment to put any in.
Sure, that would be great.
All right, one came through and it asks, how would you develop your EI when it comes to recognizing others' emotions?
That is a fantastic question, because that can be tricky, can't it? Sometimes when we know a situation, we make an assumption about an emotion, right? Um, I'll give an example. Yesterday, my sister brought home a new kitten to her two children, right? How might we assume that they were feeling, right? They have wanted a kitten for quite some time. So we might assume that they were feeling um, excited or interested or curious. And one was, and the other one was quite frightful, right? The idea of the kitten was a little bit more of a positive than this kind of skittish animal running around through their house. So I do think that taking time to be able to recognize the emotions of other people is a really great skill developer, especially if you feel like you're not great at always reading people's facial expressions. Now, we know that there are some, general facial expressions that are sort of worldwide, right? Like most people, when they smile, they're happy or somewhat pleasant. But we also know that people can smile when they're being sarcastic or when they're making fun of you or when they're being condescending. Now, at the very end of this set of slides, I have a list of resources that you can go to that are fantastic for developing emotional intelligence skills. But if you are trying to figure out, if you want to learn about people, how to identify the emotions of others, I'll tell you one of my favorite activities. And I always make my students do this. Pick something that is on, I'm going to call it TV, but whatever. YouTube or some kind of video or some kind of streaming service that you don't know anything about, um, nothing at all, and put that video on, but mute the sound, have no sound whatsoever, and watch what is happening between the people or the characters and see if you can identify how they're feeling. Watch it a couple of times on silent and watch how their body language changes. Do they shift in their chair to the side? Do they lean forward? Are their hands involved? Are they moving back? Are they mimicking the behaviors of others, or are they doing something, are they saying something friendly, but their body looks stiff as a board? That's one of the ways that I find it really helpful to practice, to learn what other people are, how other people are feeling. Then you can go back and watch it with the sound on and see if that helps at all. But I find that when we start observing without sound and we pay more attention to how the person's face is and whether or not their body and the vibe or the feelings that you're getting off their body match their face. That's one way that I often think is a great way to develop um, the ability to understand how other people are feeling, or how to read some of their emotions. Oops, maybe I'll stop that so I can see. Um,
We had a couple other questions come through. I was
sure.
going to check, Dr. Sanderson, do you have any slides, or is that sort of wrapping up that section of the?
That sort of wraps up that section,
Okay,
yes.
perfect. So we do have a good amount of time for some more questions, about 15 minutes here. So the next one that came through in the Q&A, it's sort of a two-part question. Is there a relationship between emotional intelligence and psychology? And do you need to know about psychology in order to be effective in emotional intelligence?
That's a fantastic question. I would say that the foundations of emotional intelligence really are rooted in psychology. However, no, you absolutely do not need a background in psychology to build up your emotional intelligence skills. One of the, Whenever I say that something's interesting, I mean it's interesting to me as a professor. I don't know if it's interesting to other people. But one of the really interesting things about emotional intelligence that is different than most other theories of behavior is that the theory of emotional behavior came from workplaces. It did not come from academics like myself studying something to figure out what was going on. It came from workplaces saying, you know what? Um, I mean, for years they tried to study what traits make a successful leader. Should they be a strong public speaker? Should they show confidence? Should they be charismatic? Should they be highly technically skilled? And what they found was that, there's no real specific trait that determines whether or not someone becomes a leader. But then people were saying, but wait, there are some shared traits that leaders show. And the people who rise up highest in the organizational structure tend to have the highest levels of emotional intelligence. And that got identified within business. And as that information started coming out, and as the term emotional intelligence got to be more popular, that's when we started studying it, right? That's when psychologists and business professors started studying the concept of emotional intelligence to say, is this really what business is saying it is? Is it really this powerful? And it turns out that yes, it is. And I think that sometimes having a background in psychology, I mean, psychology is such an interesting area of study, anyways. And I think it's a fantastic match with business because of how much interaction you're having with people. But emotional intelligence is something that anybody can develop, and that you don't need a specific type of education. If you think about some of the people in your life, maybe some of your friends or some of your family members, and you think about, okay, if I was having a really horrible day, or if I'd done something really horrible and I needed to go to somebody for support, who would I go to? In all likelihood, the person that you would pick has a high level of emotional intelligence, because you're going to pick someone who is going to show those things that match with empathy, support, and comfort, right? So you would say, oh, well, I might go to this friend if I wanted to go out and play baseball and have a fantastic afternoon. I'm going to go to this friend to talk about something personal because I know that they, um, will consider my feelings and I can trust them. And those people may have had absolutely no exposure to emotional intelligence, right? They may just be someone who naturally shows that they are emotionally intelligent. But I do think that one of the most exciting things about emotional intelligence is how you can develop it on your own. And you can do all kinds of tiny little things to do that, right? One of the things well, I mean, everything's available online, right? But one of the things that you can get online is this very comprehensive list of emotion words. And so if you're someone who, when your friend says, "Hey, how you feeling?" You're like, "I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm mad." And you don't have a huge range of words, you can get that list, right? You can print it out and have it at your house. And then at the end of the day, when you're going to bed, right, you could be thinking, okay, today at 12 noon, what was I doing and how did I feel? Right? And maybe you'll say, well, I felt a little bit angry at noon today. Then you pull out the list and you look at the column that describes angry and all of the words that it lists out under angry. And you think, but what emotion was I actually feeling? Was I feeling annoyed? Was I perturbed? Was I disturbed? Was I disappointed? Was I mad? Was I furious? Was I confused? Right? Because quite often we say, oh, yeah, well, you know what? That bugged me or that made me angry. But it didn't actually make me angry. Like if there's a scale and this is furious and this is angry, I was actually down here. I was more like, partially annoyed and partially confused, right? And that's one wonderful way to start to be able to fully identify our own emotions is that we don't let ourselves default to those. And I think there's 7 big emotions, and it's sort of like angry, sad, joyful, anxious. Can't remember what the others are on the spot, of course, but and then you look at those and you see all of the different words that you can use instead. And if you do that on a daily basis, all of a sudden you'll start to realize you'll be in a situation and you'll be like, oh, this person is annoying me. And you'll be like, no, I'm not annoyed. I'm not annoyed. I'm disappointed, right? Or I'm not annoyed. I am concerned. And you start to really get in tune with those emotions. And you certainly don't need a background in psychology to be able to do that.
Thank you. Some more questions coming through on the chat now. One is kind of a scenario question. I think it has been to do with the self-regulation fundamental you spoke about. So someone says, like the situation with quiz number 1, so getting the critical feedback from a manager or supervisor. Even sometimes stepping away, it can be hard to calm down. Like it consumes all their thoughts when they go home and they find themselves needing to organize a perfect script to defend themselves. So, do we have any tips of how they can work on that self-regulation?
Oh, that's a good, I used to do that too, come up with the perfect script. I don't think that perfect script ever left my mouth. Perhaps you've had better luck at it than I have. So one of the things that we tend to do, because we are human beings, is that when something has I'm using the word annoyed a lot today, even though I'm not really annoyed. I'm going to use annoyed, right? This person who has done this thing at work that you want to talk about, and you're feeling, annoyed. You're getting a little bit irritated. I'll use irritated, you're irritated with them. And so then one of the things, and this also was in the quiz, was that, I'm probably going to tell my friend, right? Or maybe my partner, or maybe my parent, or my sibling, or somebody, you know what so and so did at work, and this really is annoying me, and they're such a whatever, whatever. And, we add fuel to that fire. And then it starts in our mind. And when that rumination starts, we know that that emotion will grow, right? Whether we ruminate alone or whether we do it with multiple people. Sometimes people will be like, well, then I talk to my mom, and then I talk to my best friend, and then I talk to my boyfriend. And the next thing you knew, I've repeated this story over and over, and now it's growing and it's growing. And that will not be helpful, right? So, what kinds of things can you do to bring those emotions down? Now, of course, there's a whole ton of things that work for self-regulation. One of the things that rumination when you're really, really sad is different, but I'm talking about rumination when you're annoyed, right? When you're irritated, right? One of the things that that will do is increase your adrenaline. And so one thing that can be really helpful is to do something super fast that'll bring that adrenaline down. Because as you're thinking, I'm annoyed, I'm irritated. Your body is like, yes, you are, and I'm ready to go, right? Because our body does that naturally for us because it's so, so smart, right? It's that fight or flight kind of idea. So it's like, I'm annoyed, I'm annoyed, I'm annoyed. I'm going to come up with the perfect script. I'm going to get that person. I'm going to prove my point. And our body is like, okay, let's go now. Of course, you're not going to be able to sleep. You're way too riled up, right? So think of something that you could do that would very, very quickly drop down that adrenaline. So pick something from this list that you think would be miserable. My favorite is push-ups because I am terrible at push-ups. However, sit-ups work, jumping jacks works, skipping rope works, running with high knees works, right? Obviously, depending on your physical ability. Find something that's hard and miserable and do it until you collapse. Do it as much as you can, as fast as you can, as hard as you can, because that's going to bring that adrenaline down. And then you're going to be like, okay, all right, now I'm not quite as annoyed, right? Now, what am I going to do from here? Right? Because once we get that emotion in check, then we can start thinking about what would a good plan be going forward. Because we know that that perfect script and, something dramatic, that's not going to be what people will listen to.
Very true. So we might have time for another one or two questions. And one that I thought was interesting that came through is there a correlation between emotional wellness and emotional intelligence?
Oh, emotional wellness, like as in mental health wellness?
Yeah, I think that might be what they're implying.
That is a very good question. I mean, they are different constructs. I wouldn't know the actual um, information, like an actual correlation. I will say that there are certain mental health issues that can very much distort um, emotional self-awareness and understanding the emotions of others. So, one of the examples, of course, is anxiety and rumination. That tends to distort a person's own emotions and then how they're controlling those emotions. And when I'm talking about controlling emotions, of course, I'm talking about it at a subclinical level, right? So I'm not saying, oh, you've been diagnosed with anxiety. All you need to do are some push-ups. I do not want to imply that at all because um, that is not a tested intervention for a serious mental health issue or for an ongoing mental health issue. Um, whether or not those two are related, I'm not entirely sure. I would take a guess at some point they could be. But emotional intelligence is it's a completely subclinical, non-medical kind of model where it is meant to, be thinking about ourselves as emotional human beings and other people as emotional human beings. And of course, mental health changes so much over the course of our lifetime, right? Probably most of us will have a mental health challenge at some point during our lives. that won't necessarily in the long term affect our emotional intelligence.
Great. Thank you. So we are almost at time. Dr. Sanderson, I want to say thank you so much for such an engaging and insightful session. You can tell by all the activity in the chat and the Q&A that it gave people a lot of food for thought and lots of different things to think through. So I hope that everyone found it as interesting as I did. Thank you again, Dr. Sanderson. It was such a great session, very, very valuable. Please do continue to stay connected with us on our socials at Lakehead International and check out our archive of live events. So thank you again so much for joining us. It was such a pleasure. And I hope that everyone has an excellent day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for participating.